The Quiet Gardener. Zarahai had always been different from other Kethran nobles. While her blue-skinned sisters spent their days discussing politics and trade routes across the galaxy, she found herself drawn to simpler pleasures. The sprawling gardens of her family's estate on Kethra Prime had become her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the endless ceremonies and diplomatic functions that filled her life as the daughter of Ambassador Velhar. It was in these very gardens that she first met Marcus Chen, though she didn't know his name then. He was just another human worker, part of the terraforming crew hired to maintain the exotic plant life that her father had collected from dozens of worlds. The Kethrans had always employed humans for manual labor. They were strong, reliable, and surprisingly adaptable to different environments. Most importantly, they were quiet and kept to themselves. Marcus was particularly quiet. While other human workers often chatted among themselves during their breaks, he worked alone, tending to the delicate Altarian moonflowers and the aggressive Vegan thorn bushes with equal care. Zarahai noticed how his hands moved with precision, never wasting a motion, never damaging a single leaf. There was something almost meditative about watching him work. The first time they spoke was during the Festival of Three Moons, when most of the household staff had been given the day off. Zarahai had wandered into the gardens to find Marcus still working, carefully pruning a collection of earth roses that her father had acquired as a curiosity. "You don't need to work today," she said, her translator device rendering her words into perfect standard Galactic. "It's a holiday." Marcus looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers briefly before he returned to his work. "Plants don't observe holidays, my lady," he said simply. His voice was soft, respectful, but there was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't just being polite. "You care about them," Zarahai observed, stepping closer to examine his work. The roses were blooming magnificently, their red petals almost glowing in the light of Kethra's 3 moons. "Everything deserves care," Marcus replied, making a precise cut on a stem, "even when no one is watching." Those words stuck with Zarahai long after she had returned to the main house. There was a philosophy in them that resonated with something deep inside her. In Kethran society, everything was about appearance, about being seen and acknowledged. The idea that someone would give their best effort simply because it was the right thing to do was foreign to her world. Over the following months, Zarahai found herself visiting the gardens more frequently. She told herself she was just checking on her father's investment, but the truth was, she enjoyed talking with Marcus. He never seemed impressed by her title or her family's wealth. When she asked him about the plants, he shared his knowledge freely, explaining the intricate balance needed to keep species from dozens of different worlds living in harmony. "Each one has its own needs," he told her one afternoon as they walked past a section of crystalline formations from the mineral world of Zerion. "But they can coexist if you understand what they require and respect their differences." "Like people," Zarahai suggested. Marcus paused in his explanation and looked at her with those thoughtful dark eyes. "Yes," he said simply, "like people." It was during the harvest season that everything changed. Zarahai's father had arranged a marriage alliance with the son of a prominent trading family from the Rigel system. The announcement came during a formal dinner with representatives from 3 different species present to witness the agreement. Zarahai sat in her ceremonial robes, listening to her father outline the benefits of the union while her future husband, a pompous young Kethran named Dexmore, smiled smugly beside her. That night, Zarahai fled to the gardens. She found Marcus working by moonlight, transplanting a group of nocturnal bloomers from Epsilon Eridani. The gentle glow of the flowers provided just enough light to work by, and the sweet scent helped calm her racing thoughts. "You seem troubled," Marcus observed without looking up from his work. Zarahai explained her situation, the words pouring out of her in a rush. She told him about the arranged marriage, about her father's expectations, about the life of diplomatic functions and political maneuvering that stretched ahead of her. Marcus listened without comment, his hands steady as he continued working. "What would you do?" she asked when she had finished. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words were careful and measured. "In my culture, we believe that the heart should have a voice in such matters. But I also understand that your responsibilities are different from mine." "What if they weren't?" Zarahai asked impulsively. "What if I were just someone? Anyone?" Marcus stopped working and looked at her directly. "Then I would say that life is too short to spend it pretending to be someone you're not." The next few days passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Zarahai went through the motions, attending fittings for her ceremonial gowns and meeting with diplomats who would attend the ceremony. But every free moment found her in the gardens, seeking out Marcus's quiet wisdom and steady presence. It was her sister Veliana who first suspected something. "You've been spending a lot of time with the garden staff," she mentioned casually during a family dinner. "I enjoy the plants," Zarahai replied, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Of course you do," Veliana said with a knowing smile. "Just remember, dear sister, that some flowers are meant to be admired from a distance." The warning was clear, but Zarahai was past caring about propriety. 2 weeks before her wedding, she found Marcus in the greenhouse, working with a collection of bioluminescent fungi from the Tau Ceti system. The soft blue glow reflected off his face as he carefully adjusted their growing medium. "I've made a decision," she announced. Marcus looked up, his expression unreadable. "I'm going to refuse the marriage," she said. "I'll face whatever consequences come, but I won't spend my life in a union without love." "And what will you do instead?" Marcus asked gently. Zarahai took a deep breath. "I was hoping you might have some suggestions." Marcus set down his tools and turned to face her fully. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed to be weighing his words very carefully. "There's something I should tell you," he said finally. "Something about who I really am." Before he could continue, alarms began blaring throughout the compound. Emergency lights bathed the greenhouse in harsh red illumination as automated voices announced an incoming attack. Through the transparent walls, Zarahai could see ships descending from orbit, sleek, predatory vessels that she recognized as belonging to the hegemony, a militant faction that had been raiding the outer colonies for months. "Stay here," Marcus said, his voice suddenly carrying an authority she had never heard before. "Don't leave the greenhouse until someone comes for you." "Where are you going?" Zarahai called as he headed for the door. Marcus paused at the threshold. When he looked back at her, his eyes held a hardness that seemed completely at odds with the gentle gardener she thought she knew. "To do what I was trained to do," he said simply. As the sound of weapons fire began to echo across the estate, Zarahai watched through the greenhouse walls as Marcus Chen, the quiet human she had fallen in love with, disappeared into the chaos of battle. She had no idea that she was about to discover the most closely guarded secret in human space, and that the gentle man who tended her father's gardens carried within him the power to shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The blade awakens. The hegemony assault was swift and brutal. Their ships had bypassed the orbital defense platforms through a combination of stealth technology and inside information, suggesting they had been planning this attack for months. Ambassador Velhar's estate was no random target. It housed one of the galaxy's most extensive collections of xenobotanical specimens, along with detailed genetic databases that could be worth billions on the black market. From her hiding place in the greenhouse, Zarahai watched as armored hegemony soldiers spread across the estate grounds. Their powered suits made them look like mechanical demons in the moonlight, and their weapons cut through the Kethran security forces with terrifying efficiency. The beautiful gardens that Marcus had tended so carefully were being trampled under heavy boots, delicate flowers crushed beneath the machinery of war. She pressed herself against the glass, searching desperately for any sign of Marcus among the chaos. Part of her hoped he had found a place to hide. What could one human gardener do against trained killers? But a larger part of her was worried sick about his safety. The gentle man who had shared his wisdom about plants and life was somewhere out there in the nightmare that her home had become. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came from the East Garden, where a brilliant flash of light suddenly cut through the darkness. It wasn't the harsh glare of energy weapons, but something else, something that seemed to pulse with an inner fire. The attacking soldiers in that sector began to shout confused orders, their confident advance suddenly faltering. Zarahai squinted through the greenhouse glass, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. There was someone moving through the hegemony forces, but the figure was difficult to track. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for someone wearing armor, and wherever they went, enemy soldiers fell. A group of 5 hegemony troopers came running past the greenhouse, their usual discipline replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. One of them was talking rapidly into his communicator, his voice high with stress. "Unknown hostile in Sector 7, he reported. "Conventional weapons ineffective. Requesting backup with heavy ordnance." "Negative," came the reply from his command unit. "All heavy units are engaged. Deal with the problem using standard protocols." "Sir, you don't understand," the trooper said, stopping just outside the greenhouse where Zarahai could hear him clearly. "This isn't a standard hostile. We've lost 12 men, and we haven't even seen what we're fighting clearly. It's like fighting a ghost with a laser sword." A laser sword? Zarahai's mind raced as she tried to process this information. Such weapons were the stuff of legend, artifacts from the ancient wars that had raged across the galaxy before the current age of technology. No one had used them in centuries, and the techniques for crafting them had been lost to most civilizations. The trooper's radio crackled again. "Confirm your last transmission. Did you say laser sword?" Before the soldier could reply, something happened that made Zarahai's heart stop. A figure materialized out of the shadows behind the group of troopers, moving so silently that not one of them noticed his approach. It was Marcus, but it wasn't the Marcus she knew. Gone were the simple work clothes and humble posture. Instead, he wore form-fitting black armor that seemed to absorb light, and in his hand was a blade that glowed with contained plasma, a weapon that hummed with barely restrained energy. The transformation wasn't just in his equipment. Marcus carried himself differently now, every movement precise and purposeful. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Gentlemen," he said softly, and all 5 soldiers spun around in surprise. "You're trespassing on private property." The lead trooper raised his weapon, but Marcus was already moving. The plasma blade in his hand traced elegant arcs through the air, moving too fast for Zarahai's eyes to follow clearly. What she could see were the results. The soldiers' weapons fell apart in their hands, cut into precise pieces by the impossible sharpness of Marcus's blade. None of the men were injured, but they were suddenly and completely defenseless. "Now," Marcus continued in that same calm tone, "you have 2 choices. You can surrender peacefully and be treated according to the Galactic Convention on Prisoners of War, or you can continue this attack and face the consequences." One of the troopers, braver or more foolish than the others, reached for a backup weapon. Marcus moved again, and suddenly the soldier was on the ground, his weapon hand numb from a precise strike to a nerve cluster. The plasma blade hadn't even come close to him. Marcus had used only his empty hand to disable the threat. "I recommend surrender," Marcus said gently. Trust me. You don't want to see what happens if I decide to stop being polite." The troopers looked at each other, then at the glowing blade in Marcus's hand, then at their fellow soldier groaning on the ground. Their leader slowly raised his hands in surrender, and the others quickly followed suit. As Marcus secured the prisoners with restraints he produced from his armor, Zara noticed something that made her blood run cold. More hegemony soldiers were approaching from multiple directions, drawn by the commotion. These weren't foot soldiers. They were wearing the distinctive crimson armor of hegemony shock troops, elite units equipped with military-grade weapons and enhanced cybernetics. Marcus must have sensed them too, because he looked up from securing his prisoners and assessed the situation with the practiced eye of a professional soldier. Zara counted at least 20 enemies converging on his position, all of them armed with weapons that could level buildings. What Marcus did next defied everything Zara thought she knew about physics and warfare. He reached behind his back and withdrew a second weapon, another plasma blade, this one slightly shorter than the first. As he activated it, both weapons began to resonate with each other, their energy fields interacting in complex patterns that made the air itself seem to sing. The first shock trooper to reach the garden opened fire immediately, his heavy plasma cannon sending bolts of superheated energy toward Marcus's position. But Marcus was no longer where the shots were aimed. He moved like liquid lightning, the twin blades in his hands deflecting incoming fire with impossible precision. Each bolt that struck his weapons was redirected harmlessly into the ground or the air, and he closed the distance to his attackers with steady, inexorable progress. Zara watched in amazement as Marcus fought 20 elite soldiers simultaneously and made it look effortless. His movements were a combination of ancient martial arts and advanced combat techniques, each strike calculated to disable rather than kill. He flowed between opponents like water, never staying in one place long enough for them to coordinate their attacks. One trooper tried to flank him, but Marcus spun and delivered a kick that sent the soldier flying into a decorative fountain. Another attempted to tackle him from behind, only to find himself thrown over Marcus's shoulder in a perfect combat roll. The twin plasma blades never stopped moving, creating a defensive barrier that no enemy weapon could penetrate. But it was when the hegemony commander arrived that Zara truly understood what she was witnessing. Commander Torgon was a veteran of a dozen campaigns, a massive alien warrior whose species was known for their natural armor and enhanced strength. He carried a weapon that looked like it belonged on a starship, rather than in an infantry soldier's hands. "Enough!" Torgon roared, his translator device making his words boom across the garden. "What are you supposed to be, human?" "Some kind of ancient warrior." Marcus paused in his advance, his twin blades still humming with energy. When he spoke, his voice carried across the sudden silence with crystal clarity. "I am Marcus Chen," he said simply, "former captain of the Terran Defense Corps, graduate of the Yamamoto Academy, last certified master of the plasma blade combat arts." He shifted his stance slightly, and suddenly the air around him seemed to shimmer with potential energy. "And if you harm anyone else on this estate, I will demonstrate why the ancient ways were never truly forgotten." Commander Torgon laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the greenhouse walls. "The plasma blade arts died out centuries ago, human. Whatever tricks you've learned won't save you from modern firepower." "Perhaps," Marcus replied quietly. "But there's something you should understand about humans, Commander. We don't just preserve knowledge, we improve upon it." What happened next was beyond Zarahi's ability to fully comprehend. Marcus brought his twin blades together in a specific pattern, and suddenly the air around him erupted with contained lightning. The energy field that surrounded him wasn't just defensive, it was actively aggressive, reaching out to disable electronic systems and overload power sources. Every weapon within 20 meters suddenly went dead, their energy cells drained by the field Marcus had generated. In the sudden silence that followed, Marcus's voice carried with the authority of absolute certainty. This is your final warning. Withdraw your forces now, or discover why humans spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of war. Commander Torgan looked around at his disabled soldiers and their useless weapons. For the first time since the attack began, uncertainty flickered in his alien eyes. He had come here expecting to face primitive security forces and panicked civilians. He had not expected to encounter a living legend wielding weapons that belonged in the galaxy's oldest and most fearsome myths. As if summoned by some signal Zara High couldn't detect, more figures began emerging from the shadows around the estate. They wore the same black armor as Marcus, carried the same plasma blade weapons, and moved with the same deadly grace. The estate's gardening staff were revealing themselves as something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The hegemony attack was about to become their worst nightmare. The garden's secret guardians. The revelation hit Zara High like a physical blow. Every human worker on her father's estate, the quiet groundskeepers, the maintenance staff, the humble laborers she had barely noticed over the years, they were all emerging from concealment, wearing identical black armor and carrying plasma blade weapons that hummed with deadly purpose. 23 figures in total surrounded the hegemony forces, their movements coordinated with military precision. These weren't gardeners who had been trained to fight. These were warriors who had been disguised as gardeners. The difference was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for, and Commander Torgan was experienced enough to recognize a trap when he found himself in one. Impossible, the hegemony commander breathed, his translated voice carrying a note of genuine fear for the first time since the attack began. The Terran Defense Corps was disbanded 50 years ago. The plasma blade academies were closed. The knowledge was supposed to be lost. Marcus stepped forward, his twin weapons still active but held in a non-threatening position. Knowledge is never truly lost, Commander. It just goes into hiding until it's needed again. His voice carried a weight of authority that made several hegemony soldiers step backward involuntarily. Did you really think humanity would give up our most effective defensive capabilities just because the Galaxy Council requested it? The truth behind his words was staggering in its implications. For 50 years, the galactic community had believed that humanity had abandoned their warrior traditions in favor of peaceful cooperation. The Terran Defense Corps had been publicly dissolved, their elite academies closed, their ancient combat arts declared obsolete in an age of energy weapons and automated warfare. But it had all been an elaborate deception. While humanity took on the role of humble laborers and service workers throughout the galaxy, their best warriors had simply gone underground. They had taken positions as gardeners, mechanics, janitors, and maintenance staff, jobs that gave them access to critical infrastructure while keeping them invisible to potential threats. "You've been watching us," Commander Torgan accused, his massive frame seeming to shrink as the reality of the situation became clear. "All this time, humans have been embedded in our societies, our governments, our military installations." "Not watching," Marcus corrected gently. "Protecting. There's a difference." One of the other human warriors stepped forward, removing her helmet to reveal a woman with steel-gray hair and scars that spoke of old battles. "Captain Chen, permission to explain the situation to our guests?" Marcus nodded. "Granted. Master Sergeant Kim." The older woman looked directly at Commander Torgan as she spoke. "I am Elena Kim, formerly of the 7th Terran Rangers, currently serving as head of agricultural systems for this estate. For the past 12 years, I've been responsible for the hydroponic gardens that feed the ambassador's household." She paused, letting that information sink in. "I've also been responsible for monitoring hegemony troop movements in this sector and preparing contingency plans for exactly this type of assault." Another warrior spoke up, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25. I'm David Park, assigned to Environmental Systems Maintenance, also a graduate of the Miyamoto Institute for Advanced Combat Studies. He smiled pleasantly. I've been looking forward to field testing some of the new plasma resonance techniques we've developed. The introductions continued around the circle, each warrior revealing their dual identity as both humble worker and lethal guardian. The head of the estate's cleaning staff was a former Special Operations commander. The shuttle pilot was a decorated space combat veteran. Even the elderly man who tended the ornamental fish pond turned out to be a master of explosive ordnance disposal. Zarahai felt her worldview crumbling and reforming as she listened. Every human she had ever met, every worker who had served her family with quiet efficiency, potentially carried within them the power to level cities. The implications were staggering. If this was true for her father's estate, how many other human workers throughout the galaxy were actually hidden defenders? Commander Torgan seemed to be thinking along the same lines. How many? He demanded. How many of our people are actually your people? Marcus exchanged glances with his team before answering. Enough, he said simply. When humanity agreed to take supporting roles in galactic society, we never agreed to be defenseless. Every human settlement, every major installation, every diplomatic facility has its guardians. We just prefer that most people don't know about us. The hegemony commander's communications device suddenly crackled to life with panicked reports from other attack sites. The assault on Ambassador Velhar's estate had been just one part of a coordinated strike against multiple targets across the sector. But from the sound of the radio chatter, things were going very badly for the hegemony forces everywhere. Orbital Station 7 reports heavy resistance, came one transmission. They have plasma blade users. Repeat, confirmed plasma blade users are defending the station. Mining Colony Epsilon is requesting immediate evacuation, reported another voice. Unknown defenders with advanced combat capabilities have neutralized our assault teams. Fleet Command, this is Strike Group Theta, came a third report, this one tinged with desperation. We are under attack by what appear to be converted freighters, but they're fighting like military vessels. Our stealth advantage has been completely compromised. Marcus listened to the reports with the expression of someone hearing exactly what he had expected to hear. The thing about humans, Commander, he said conversationally, is that we're very good at pattern recognition. The hegemony has been conducting raids for months, always hitting targets that seemed undefended, always managing to bypass security systems that should have kept you out. It was only a matter of time before we figured out that you had inside information. So you set a trap, Torgan said, his voice hollow with the realization of what had happened. We set several traps, Master Sergeant Kim corrected. Tonight's attacks hit 17 different targets, and we've been ready for all of them. Your inside source has been feeding you information we wanted you to have for the past 6 weeks. The scope of the operation was breathtaking. Humanity had identified a threat to galactic peace, tracked it to its source, and then orchestrated a massive counterintelligence operation designed to eliminate the entire hegemony raiding network in a single coordinated strike. And they had done it all while maintaining the illusion that they were nothing more than humble workers and service personnel. Zarahai's thoughts were interrupted by a new arrival. Her father, Ambassador Velhar, came striding across the damaged garden with a small escort of Kethran security personnel. But instead of looking shocked or frightened by the revelation of his staff's true nature, he appeared remarkably calm. Captain Chen, he said formally, inclining his head in a gesture of respect. I trust the situation is well in hand? Yes, sir, Marcus replied, coming to a position that wasn't quite military attention, but certainly wasn't the casual posture of a gardener. The hegemony assault has been repelled with minimal casualties on our side. We have prisoners for interrogation and enough intelligence data to roll up their entire operation. Ambassador Velhar nodded approvingly. Excellent. And the garden damage? Marcus actually smiled at that question. Nothing that can't be repaired, sir. We were careful to avoid the rare specimens during the engagement. It was only then that Zarahai fully understood what she was witnessing. Her father had known. The arrangement between the Kethran government and the hidden human defenders had been established years ago, probably decades ago. The employment of human workers wasn't just about their skills. It was about their protection. "You knew," she said, stepping out of the greenhouse for the first time since the attack began. "Father, you knew what they were all along?" Ambassador Velhar turned to his daughter with an expression of gentle understanding. "Of course I knew, my dear. The Galactic Council has known about the Human Guardian networks since they were established. We simply agreed to maintain the fiction that they had been disbanded." "But why?" Zarahai asked, looking around at the assembled warriors who had returned to their positions around the captured hegemony forces. "Because sometimes," her father explained, "the most effective protection is the kind that nobody knows exists. The hegemony attacked tonight because they believed their targets were undefended. Pirates avoid human colonies because they know they're protected, but they don't know by what. Slavers steer clear of shipping lanes with human crews because the last 3 groups that tried to raid them simply vanished." Marcus holstered his weapons and approached Zarahai, his expression returning to something closer to the gentle man she had fallen in love with. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," he said quietly. "I wanted to tell you the truth before everything that's been happening between us went any further." Zarahai looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to reconcile the deadly warrior she had just witnessed with the patient gardener who had taught her about caring for things that couldn't care for themselves. "Who are you, really?" she asked. "Both," Marcus replied honestly. "I'm a soldier when I need to be, and a gardener when I choose to be. The skills complement each other more than you might think. Both require patience, attention to detail, and the ability to nurture things so they can grow into what they're meant to become." As if to demonstrate his point, Marcus knelt beside a cluster of earth roses that had been damaged during the fighting. With the same careful precision he had used to disable enemy soldiers, he began treating the injured plants, his armored fingers surprisingly gentle as he worked. "The question is," he continued without looking up from his work, "what happens now? Your engagement to Dexmore is still arranged, and I'm still technically just a member of your father's staff." Zarahai looked around at the garden that had been their meeting place, now marked by the evidence of battle but already showing signs of recovery under Marcus's care. She thought about the gentle philosopher who had taught her about the importance of caring for things when no one was watching, and about the deadly protector who would risk everything to keep the innocent safe. "I think," she said slowly, "that it's time for both of us to stop pretending to be something we're not." Ambassador Velhar cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps this conversation would be better continued inside," he suggested. "We have quite a bit to discuss, and I believe there may be some changes to certain social arrangements that need to be made." As they walked toward the main house, Zarahai found herself thinking about what Marcus had said months ago about different species learning to coexist when their needs were understood and respected. Tonight had revealed that the galaxy was far more complex than most people realized, with hidden guardians and secret arrangements that kept the peace in ways that the public never saw. But it had also revealed something simpler and more personal. That sometimes the person you need most is the one who's been right beside you all along, quietly tending to the things that matter while the rest of the world looks the other way. The garden would recover from tonight's damage. The galaxy would be safer with the hegemony threat eliminated, and Zarahai had finally found someone who understood that the most important work often happens in the shadows, done by those who choose to protect rather than to dominate. Some flowers, she realized, were indeed meant to be admired from a distance, but others were meant to be cherished up close, tended with care, and allowed to bloom into something beautiful and strong. The quiet human she had fallen in love with had shaken the world tonight. But in the end, what mattered most was that he had chosen to use that power to protect the things he cared about, including her.